What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another One Piece related video. This video, guys, is going to be going over my guide for Rebecca for OP09. So this is preliminary ideas and concepts, mainly due to the fact that our OP9 is going to look very similar to the ending, probably, of the Japan meta. And so we are going to be doing speculations on my deck build, how I'm kind of approaching it, which this deck list might look very familiar. And then we're going to be going into the decks and matchups and ideas and cards that we have to look out for in some of these other decks that we're going to be facing. I've chosen, I think it's about 6 decks we'll be going over after we go over the Rebecca list and kind of giving you the concept and ideas behind how to pilot and play this list coming into this next set. So let's kind of get into it, all right? So before we get into the nuance of the deck itself, I do want to mention that we do have about 3 cards here in Juno Bastardo, or on Sim it's called Destructive Sword of Thunder. You can trade this card out for whatever tech cards you kind of feel like might be more applicable. It's not that this card is bad, it's just that this card kind of just fills that slot right now. I went with Truno because it's searchable, and we're already at 11 non-Dressrosa type cards. So that's about where I want to keep it, is 11 and under. So you could trade these to other Dressrosa cards, or you could trade them out of Dressrosa cards. But if you trade them out of them, just probably look for cards that are recurable, either with Rebecca or Moncherie, as it will add a lot of inconsistency to your draw power. So you want something you can get back. Some people have been experimenting with Jax. They've been experimenting with other stuff. I'm using Truno to shore up the mid game and still give some strength to the late game, because Truno plus Kuzan can kill anything. So once you're at 15 cards or more. So that's kind of where we're at there. Now, as for some other interesting cards, most of this is very similar to the list I already run, exception, like, okay, I'm running 4 Sabos. Part of that is because, like, you could switch out 1 Sabo, but because we run 11 cards that we kind of want to draw, we want blockers out, and ultimately Sabo is just a very solid blocker, and or just a good swing. You know, play 5, swing a character into a character is pretty solid. 5 for a 6 is pretty good. We are running 4 Suleiman, and the reason we're running Suleiman is that he is a better reducer into the mid to late game because he doesn't require us to do anything but swing with him or play him. And playing 3 to reduce by 2 isn't great, but Tashigi was that for a while. This is kind of our version of Tashigi for a large degree. And he has the potential on the turn he comes out to be a reducer by 4, so that is actually kind of relevant in some key situations. But mostly we have him in here because he synergizes so well with Aramaki and another card, Stainless, in the early to mid game to allow us to get rid of 4 drops, which is kind of the name of the game, as a lot of decks are trying to be able to match Doffy in speed or play around that same 4-drop magic number. So because of that, having something that reduces by 2 and having so many things that can bottom deck at 2 is super useful. Now let's talk about Stainless. Why is Stainless so good? Well, Stainless is actually just Aramaki without the blocker and has a 1k counter and is significantly cheaper. This is a card I had not really been considering, not because I wouldn't consider him, but because I completely forgot he existed. So shout out to Serena. You guys might know Serena as the individual who she piloted Rebecca to a 6-3 finish in a regional not too long ago. She jumped into the stream last week and was like, hey, what about Stainless? And so I looked into Stainless. I really like the card. It has in many ways felt both better and worse than Houndblaze. Houndblaze allows us to be a bit more aggressive, allows us to have a lot more swinging power, but I also found that there was a lot of times where when I used Houndblaze, I wasn't able to use the power up to do anything with it because I don't want to go at their life very often. So Stainless kind of gave us that substitute for it. On top of that, he helps us get rid of the 19 potential bricks stuck in our hand, which is perfectly okay. Like, that's what Kobe was kind of slotting in for, but I wanted bottom deck options. So Stainless felt that need for that. He's been a absolute rock for helping us in matchups like Black Yellow Luffy. Even just bottom decking stuff away from Doffy is actually very annoying for Doffy. If you put all his Jinbeis together on the bottom, it doesn't matter that he can cycle through his deck to find them again. He's going to find them in a clump, and he's going to get rid of a lot of them just for one of them. Or he's going to leave a lot of them on top of his deck, in which, yeah, cool, you're going to get all your Jinbeis back, but does that help you when you start losing hand size? No, not really. So ultimately, Stainless has been very useful in those matchups. He is also a pseudo blocker, and for those that don't know the term pseudo blocker means that they rest themselves and have such a potent effect that your opponent is more or less incentivized to attack them, which gives us the ability to be a little bit more surviving. Rebecca has issues with surviving the early game. Stainless helps by removing things and then kind of giving our opponent something that they're incentivized to take out. Because if they don't take Stainless out that turn, we can either bottom deck something again the next turn, or we start sticking Dawn on him and swinging into stuff, which is not necessarily where our opponent wants to be. Card has been awesome. I've really liked him. And the last kind of thing to talk about is we are running 4 Hajrudin over 4 Orlumbus. A lot of people will tell you Orlumbus is the go-to reducer. Hajrudin is not nearly as good. Hajrudin has he essentially has a once per turn effect. If we ever get something that allows us to restand our leader, Hajrudin is goated. But Hajrudin allows you to rest your leader, reduce one of your opponent's characters by 4. He is also a 6-drop 7k body. So he's just another late game boss monster for us, essentially. Which is really useful and really nice and is very, very nice to have on the 6-drop curve. If we stick out a Stainless the turn before, so let's say one of the things that I will say that this deck does not do as effectively, and why I've kind of debated taking out Trunos for something like Scarlet, for instance, is because there's not really a way for us to set up on 2 for something that can reduce for Stainless. So we get to play Stainless the turn he comes out. He doesn't really do anything. The following turn, we can rest Stainless and bottom deck something, or we can swing Stainless, swing Hajrudin, which, as long as we have stage, which is cool. But if we turn these Trunos into Scarlets, we could have some cool combos of, like, even reducing stuff by 4 even to then put a Stainless out. Or you could Scarlet to play a Kyros pop a 1-drop, and then Stainless bottoms a 4-drop, which is super relevant, super nice to have. And we just developed 2 5k bodies that are now in rested mode, which makes them pseudo blockers. Our opponent can choose to go for them or keep going for face. So Trunos may become Scarlets, and like I said, this is kind of a preliminary OP09 list. This is my end of 8.5. I haven't done a whole lot of rebuilding or reteching, but so far a lot of these cards have worked out well. We have the 1 Kongun for finishing out games, 2 Luffys for bottom decking cards from our trash so we don't deck out. Same thing with Moncherie, but she also gives us a recursion engine late, and that recursion engine is once we have Kuzan Aramaki out, all we need to do is use Moncherie, get back Rebecca to grab a Sabo. We get to filter through more cards, and our stuff becomes unkillable, and we just keep getting to add cards back that we can then toss away with Aramaki to get rid of stuff. So ultimately, this deck is about going super, super late, and you utilize a lot of these tools like Stainless, like Kyros, like Suleiman, even Hajrudin and Truno to just survive the early to mid game. Once we get the late game, it's very hard for decks to power us out. So with that being said, let's look at some of our opponents and how they might, power us out. So this is the most recent top finishing list from November 17th. They got second place in the Hiroshima area in the Japanese setting. This is the Blackbeard list for it. They were running 1 Bardo, 2 Moncherie, 4 Laboon, 4 Van Augur, 4 Burgess, 4 Shiryu, 4 Stronger, just a huge amount of the package, right, of the Blackbeard package. And then, of course, Finger Gun, because you need something that allows you to KO things. And then Liberation, I believe, is their KO of 4 or something like that. Yeah, KO of 4 or less. Because this nullifies their abilities, and if they're 4 or less, KO them. So, ultimately, this list is relatively slow, actually. The thing about Teach is that he is kind of about building up, having his dudes on board, and then getting their effects as they get to attack. But none of them get to attack on the turn that they come out. He uses a lot of events for KOing stuff. He searches a lot with his stage and with his event, and even with his Lafitte. But despite being able to search and have so many cards in hand, if you just kind of grind him out of resources, yes, 10-drop Teach is a very destructive card. A very disruptive card, not destructive, but disruptive card. But you can ultimately just kind of designate the pacing of the game, because these are, his predominant win con is using his leader, and then you have like Burgess to make it so like, oh yeah, Burgess is hard to get rid of. But ultimately this deck, I think, will actually struggle with Rebecca. The biggest reason, yes, we have a lot of on-play effects, but if we take a look at my list, we also have a ton of activate main, on swing, activate main, event kill. Yes, is on play, but when attacking. On play KO, but on my turn, -5 to the board. Just gets to swing into things on the turn he comes out, swing into things on the turn he comes out, swing into things on the turn he comes out, swing into things on the turn he comes out. Yes, we have a lot of on plays. Our Rebecca's become considerably worse on turns that our opponent does that. But, we also have activate main and Moncherie. We have so much activate main, and because of our stage, we have so many things that can swing on the turn they come out, that I don't think we're really worried about BlackBeard. A lot of his stuff also requires you to rest this character. Rest this character. On attack. Activate main. Rest this character? Yeah, you may rest this character. Like, all of his stuff for his mid to early game requires you to rest the characters. So if he's not setting up his blockers early, which he only really has Vasco Shot and maybe a Bardo, or if he's running them 3 Bardos, then he runs out of the ability to protect these characters early when he's trying to get any type of card advantage with them, which they're all really low-cost bodies too, like 2K, 1K, 0, 0, 0. Like, you just swing into them and clear them. 5. Like, you just swing in, clear them, and it's problematic and difficult for him to be able to deal with that and actually maintain a board state to allow him to win. He doesn't like having to play Laboon and an event in the same turn. Maybe on his 8 Dawn turn, maybe that's how he kind of wants to go. But even at that, that's only clearing one character, and it's setting up the Laboon to be KO'd very immediately thereafter. So ultimately, I think BlackBeard will be a fine matchup for us. It's more or less just you have to really try to have stage early. Try to have Kyros kind of early, and then you're looking for your Stainlesses, your Aramakis, and your Trunos as your main KO card and bottom decking, and then you want to have at least a couple of Hashirudins hit one of them hit the board on curve if possible, and have maybe another one for backup. So when we look at our next deck, it's Doffy, which is, obviously these are the top 2 decks. That's why I'm kind of showing them first. This Doffy list is a little bit different than some of the lists we've seen here. Not too terribly much so, though. They're on 2 Red Rocks opposed to the Gravity Blades. Just a lot of decks want to go tall now, especially something like Shanks. So having something that just gets rid of anything is going to be good. You have your early game removers in Laws and Jozus. This one's on 4 Jozus. They are still running Teach as a 4 of. They have 3 puddings, a Kaya for another 2K. They have reduced the number of Peronas, which means that you are going to be either using just Boas to kind of stack your deck, Buggies to stack your deck, or you're just doing it blind. Because they're adding in more 2Ks in the case of this law, which allows you to play him, off of leader ability, for instance. Play him off leader ability, add him back to your hand, you gain a 2K, and your opponent discards a card, which is super relevant and super useful, so I could see why they've kind of moved to something like this. This deck is still going to be very annoying for us to deal with, and I think it's going to be relatively strong, and we're going to see a lot of him in the meta, which does mean that you may want to use Scarlets to be able to have a better answer for this. I just think that Truno in general is better for the rest of the meta, so like having the Scarlets tech in over the Trunos for this would just be dependent on if you see a lot of Doffys. And just kind of a refresher as to why that's a good thing. So say you're on your turn, your 4 Dawn turn, you played Scarlet your turn 1, you have a Suleiman in hand and a Kyros in hand. Well, you can use the Scarlet to play the Suleiman. You now reduce something by 4 to then play out a Kyros, KO the thing that you've reduced by 4, put the extra Dawn on the Kyros, and swing into their rested character. If they did the Jinbei play out a character thing. If they just have one character, well, you get to reduce them by 4, play out a Kyros, KO them, and use leader ability to refill the hand of the 2 cards you just lost. You gain an extra 1. which is super useful. Or one of the things you can do, like I had mentioned earlier, is use Scarlet to play the Kyros. Kyros KOs the 1-drop that they played on their initial turn, and then you play out your Stainless for your 4-Dawn. Stainless then uses that -2 the Manchurius to bottom deck one of their characters and get a brick out of your hand, so that the following turn, if you don't have a Hashiruden to play, and you want to play a blocker, for instance, like a Sabo, you can play the Sabo, protect your guys, and still have enough fewer cards in your hand so that you can use leader ability to draw, which then is pretty useful, right? It's maintaining as much cards in hand against a deck where you need to stay at about 5 to 6 cards in hand to make it really difficult for them to punish with pudding, but you want to stay at that 5 to 6 to have enough cards to counter out with. So, being able to get rid of bricks is pretty useful. So, I mean, that's where the Scarlet comes in. I think the Scarlet is a good option replacement for Truno. I think Truno is better into if you happen to see a lot of yellow in your meta. I think that this is going to be very good. Truno also helps with stuff like Bonney, for instance, because a lot of her characters are kind of high costed. So 1 Kuzan and then a Truno later, you can start KOing basically everything. And so, Truno can help with some of those other matchups. But if you see just nothing but Doffys, go ahead and remove those Trunos. Go into your Scarlets, for instance. All right, our next deck is Pluffy. Pluffy is something that if you paid attention to my ranking video, I think he's an A-tier deck. So I kind of wanted to go over our A-tier decks, as well as the S-tier decks. So Pluffy is still running a couple of laws. Frenosuke's gone down in number of usage because you're getting some other options of cards that you kind of want to run. Having another card that allows you to get Straw Hat cards is super nice. It also allows you to find your laws, which is super nice. So having another searcher is kind of the route that they're going with. So it is a little less reliant anti-black, but that's also because there's not as much black cards. They're running Kamazo, so they have an answer to the 2-drop blockers that are being run by BlackBeard, or getting rid of their Manchurius, which is super useful. It's another 2K for them, and it is a Kids Pirate one, so if they were running the Searcher event, they could find it. They are not, though. They're just running the Law and the Zorojoro. The new, I think this is the Rush Sanji, right? You may return one of your Dons. This character gains Rush this turn, and your opponents then rest up to one of their 6-cost or lower characters. So this is either pseudo removal or gets any blocker out of the way and just helps finish out the game. So they're no longer really running Kaidos. They are running predominantly a Straw Hat package, and that's just because it adds consistency to the deck. That being said, no Kaidos is a lot better for us to be able to play around. This card is hella annoying, for sure. But their deck is much more about trying to play out this package, and the cards that we need to answer are the same cards as before. You need to be able to kill Sangoro whenever you see him. Sanji is a card that if you can kill him, kill him. Same thing kind of with Luffy. But these are on-play effects, so they're only like once. So the thing that you really have to get rid of is the Sangoro, and then also, Kamazo might be a problem if you're trying to do like a Manchuri loop, but I don't know why you're trying to do that early. Kids is a kill on sight, just because he gives him back Dawn, so he can keep using his Dawn minus effects and stay effectively at the same Dawn, which we don't want to do. And then you got to play around Usahachi. So some of the important cards that we want to see in this matchup early on is going to be having Kyros to be able to KO stuff. On curve, Hashiruden is really, really nice to give us that reduction. To set up for the following turn, we want Aramaki on play. Aramaki is an 8-drop 8K blocker. There is nothing in their deck that can answer this other than just swinging into it. So having this here plus a -4 allows us to get rid of pretty much everything that is a legitimate threat early on. Like I said, Sangoro, Kid, those are the things you really want to have to get rid of early. You can get rid of the Zorojoro because it's a character we need to get rid of. Honestly, Scarlet might be an okay play for against this deck as well, just because the extra reduction could help us be able to pop their stuff, because it's not often that on your turn 2 you need a -4 on something. But this actually might be a deck where we need to -4 a character just to be able to KO it. Sangoro is one of those cards I'm looking at. If they can, ramp into it and just play Sangoro on curve, then yeah, having that -4 is going to be super nice to have just to be able to get rid of this so they don't get extra draw power on their next coming turns. This deck does take a lot of its own life, so you can't really prevent it from gaining that card advantage between how much it draws and how much of its own life it takes. So choking it out's not necessarily an option, but it is surviving its board state and forcing it to have to rebuild because it only has 3 rushers now. I mean, it only had 3 rushers before. It now has them in archetype, but they are smaller bodies, and they're actually kind of easier for us to deal with outside of the fact that they rest one of our 6 costs, which is why Aramaki becomes so important. But if you can survive with an Aramaki and then get into a 10-drop Kuzan, you basically win the game from there because we can answer pretty much everything that comes out of there. If they are using Lin to get rid of some of our 6-drops, that's fine. That gives us extra life. It gives us extra time to get to the Aramaki Kuzan, which is a super important couple of cards to get to. You don't necessarily want to have both in your opening hand, though, because you do want to have a decent amount of counter to protect yourself and keep yourself relatively healthy. If you can get to your Aramaki turn and are at 3 life, and you can still use it to remove one of their characters. So if your Hajruden lives a turn and you can remove one of their characters, you are in a very good spot to actually be able to deal with stuff. That being said, if on the turn before you play out our Stainless is actually very good for helping us get rid of or dealing with some of their cards because of the fact that he is a 2-cost base card, so we don't have to reduce as much. So if we play Stainless and we don't remove on that turn, that's fine. The following turn we play Hajruden -4s, and we get rid of a 6 cost, which is going to be relatively relevant because, you know, a lot of their stuff is in 4, so we kind of want to get rid of that. So ultimately, play with a lot of defense early. Try to play into your Hajruden Aramaki because that's going to be our important combo line, and then stick a Kuzan and try to keep your life at about 2 to 3 as you're playing into those cards. If you can get a Luffy out on curve and have a ton of cards in trash, play the Luffy and start trying to take their stuff out. That's perfectly fine. If they force you to go first, just play into a very defensive hand. Try to get Sanjis, try to get blockers, try to play for getting into that same late game strategy. Just note it's going to be a little harder because we're off curve. So what is our next matchup? Well, we're going to be talking about Bonney. So I did put Bonney at the bottom of A tier. I think that Bonney was still a bit of a step above of Lucci, and it's reflected in the Japanese meta and the fact that Bonney still has a win or two roughly even late at the end of the season. She top 4 here. And there isn't really any Lucci lists popping up. When we go look at the Japan stuff, our last Lucci was at the beginning of November. Well, no, there's one in the 15th as well. We could talk about Lucci, but I don't think he really changes much. He's really pretty much the same list here. We'll open him up just to why am I opening? Oh, god damn it. Stupid ads. I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Where was he? Where did Lucci go? No, I lost him. There is a Sanji. We could talk about the Sanji. I didn't want to talk about too many decks here, though. I opened a black, yellow Luffy, right? Yeah, okay. Anyhow, we'll talk about the Bonney. We won't talk about the Lucci. Lucci's basically the same list. It's the same problem we've had before. He's going to be a menace for us, but I don't think he's going to be as much of the meta, so we don't have to worry about it as much. As for Bonney, there's a decent chance she could still be a big part of the meta. She does counter purple Luffy pretty well, and because of that, we might see more Bonney showing up if too many Pluffys start coming into the meta. So what are they kind of going with? Well, they're adding the killers back in to get more draw power. They're going a bit more heavy on the Supernova package. And they are still running Doffys, and this guy's actually running 4 of them. They're running 4 Shanks. They got 4 Carrots, 4 Hody Jones. Like, the amount of counter in this deck is actually kind of low. Because they're still running 3 kids. Like, this guy is running so much top end, but he did really well, right? He went 11-1 and got top 4, which is insanely good. But ultimately, this deck is very defensive. You are playing for super, super late to start playing big character after big character after big character to start taking over the game while utilizing this Cavendish Carrot in the mid game to be very, very annoying and a nuisance. It's very similar to the Bonnies that we see now, just the numbers are a bit heavier on the top end. And their 2Ks are somewhat limited. You know, they're running Scratch Band, they're running Ezos, and the other Scratch Band Poo. So they still have 10 2Ks, but like they're electing to drop kind of out of the Doffy Pirates. They're still running Doffy, but they're just searching all their Supernova stuff. Ultimately, I think it's perfectly fine. I think that this is a pretty solid list overall. But how do we deal with it? Well, it's the same way we've dealt with Bonney in the past. We play out our characters. We are constantly trying to remove their stuff. You have to KO or bottom deck these Rosies on sight. Like, these cannot stand to live because we have to deal with their mid game. If their mid game is too strong and stays on the board too long, we're going to run into issues of actually being able to survive and win the game. So these cards have to die, which means that most of the time, this has to die on sight. As we get into the late game, they're going to be dropping kids. If we can keep their mid-game board clear as they're dropping, like if they go into a kid turn and they drop kid Rosie, then all we have to do is be able to bottom deck kid. That sounds easier than it is, but bottom decking the kid is going to be the game plan. If they're on their 9 and they play kid into Rosie and they leave a Dawn up and swing 5, cool. If we have Aramaki established, then what we do is we drop Kuzan, KO the Rosinante, which drops this guy down to a 3. Hopefully we still have a Hajrudin or Suleiman on board. We will swing and bottom deck him. And then we don't really have to worry about too much. The things that we have to play around are Hody Jones. Hody is going to be putting a lot of pressure on our life, but oftentimes that is reducing them, so that does put them at a little bit of a state where we can KO them. So important cards for this matchup are still going to be kind of our top end, right? We still want to survive to our top end. But another card that is actually very important in this for helping close out the game is going to be Luffy. So Luffy with a Kong gun is a great way for us to finish this game out, just because, especially on a turn where they've decided, all right, I got 2 or 3, let's say our leader's rested, let's say our Hajrudin's rested, and let's say our Kuzan is rested, and they play a Doffy, and they want to keep all 3 of those rested. If we already have a Luffy out, that is a massive overreach by them if they are at 3 or less life, due to the fact that they now have no way to rest our characters. And while, yes, the Hajrudin has been rested, we can still play like Suleiman to reduce the Doffy by another 2. Which isn't necessarily enough, but, there's some things that we can do. If we rest him, or if we have a Truno in hand, we can Truno KO him so that, or keep up 4 towards the end so that we can Truno afterwards KO him to keep ourselves in a spot where we can actually still survive the next turn. So what we do is you Kong gun the Luffy, swing the Luffy, 13 at life. Usually they won't have enough cards in their hand to get out of that 13, so they take 2, they go down to 1. We then have Aramaki probably still standing. We kind of want to leave him standing. If we have one other character on board, which we should, we swing with that character to try to get some cards out of their hand. We can choose to restand the Luffy if we think that taking their life is going to be valid, depending on what our other character is. So let's say we have Aramaki, or Aramaki Kuzan still, right? Let's say we had 2 Kuzans. We got to that point. Highly unlikely, but let's say we did. If we have Aramaki and another big character, it could be Hajrudin, it can be Aramaki, any of these other characters that are decent sized body to get cards out of their hand. If we get their hand to below 3 cards, then what we want to do is stick if they take that 2 life and that puts them to 5 cards, then we want to stick our Dawn on the Aramaki and just go for it. Because if they come out of it, yeah, they got 2 swings at us, but if we still have a blocker, then I'm perfectly okay with it, because the only way they get out of that, if we have an Aramaki blocker available, the only way they get out of it is a Hody Jones, which is how they would get they'd get out of it no matter what if they have a Hody Jones. So in that type of scenario, we close out the game by being able to clear out that last life with whoever we're swinging with, and then Luffy to swing in with his double attack again, or with his big buff again, and whatever Dawn we have remaining if we have any. If not, if we're not confident that we can get through it, say they have too many cards in hand, then don't force it this turn. The Luffy has already taken 2 life out of there. We don't have to swing with our other character, and then we use like Truno or something out of hand to just allow us to KO the Doffy so they don't have a board state again, which is super valuable for us, super strong. And that's kind of the best way to play it in that matchup anyways, is just like, if you don't feel like you have 100% win, play it a couple more turns. We have a better chance of winning it, unless they hit a Hody. But if they hit a Hody, hopefully you have enough counter in hand. All right, Black Yellow Luffy. This deck is exactly the same. They're running Rygos now, just because this allows them to get rid of cards that are stuck in life if people are trying to turbo it. And it allows them to clear top end stuff. So very annoying card for us to have to deal with. We do kind of want to play around it some, but we can't be afraid of it, so we have to play in a good way. Also note, if they do the Rygo and they don't have, they don't know what that last card in their life is, Rygo can be very bad for them, because to be able to, like leader ability and baby that turn, they're going to have to, like, they can't. So they're going to have to baby blind, or they're going to have to do something like 5-drop Luffy, clear the life, use leader ability, put something back, and then put a baby out, which means, yeah, they still have 1 life, but they're also only a 7k. So if we have anything else established and they Rygo for that, 1, they're already at 10 Dawn, so that's a thing. But 2, we just go for it, like, at that point. So, like, I think this list is roughly what we're going to see a lot of. Ivankovs to help clear out life some, give them some more blockers. Aces to help finish out the game. Luffy's super important for clearing life. Luffy's good for drawing. Sabo's good for drawing. Geckos, of course, Flampeys. All the standard, bog standard stuff is still there. The biggest difference now is they're running Rygos instead of Kuzans. On top of that, they're back on some aces. So ultimately, the same cards that we kind of wanted to see in the current matchup into them is what we want to see then. We want to see Stainlesses, we want to see Aramakis, we want to see Hajrudans, because we want to bottom deck their 5-drops. Because putting them into their trash just gives them stuff to put into life. If we keep bottom decking it, they keep having to draw, they keep having to search, they keep having to play with a bit more of a fair deck. Because even if they play the Gecko and start doing their stuff, a lot of their stuff doesn't have rush, so you just keep putting their rush cards to the bottom, and you put their Sabos to the bottom, and you KO everything else, and you just don't care. Like, oh yeah, you're a 9-cost, you're an 11k swing leader. I'll block it with one of my chump blockers because their removal is limited. And then we're just gonna go for it, right? You know, if they're trying to set up for a Gecko turn, they can't Rygo and Gecko and leader ability. They can't do all 3. They can only choose to do 2 of those things, which sets us up to be in a very advantaged state. So ultimately, I think we still have a very favorable matchup there. It's just about trying to play your early game somewhat safe, start developing your big boys, and just using your bottom deckers efficiently to keep bottom decking their stuff. If they're swinging into a Stainless with a 5k swing, give them a counter for it. Even if it's a 2k, give them a counter for it. Because if it forces multiple attacks into it, this pseudo blocker has done his job of protecting our life. And this is a card they need to be afraid of because it will help us clear their board relatively consistently. So, you know, not a hard matchup, not one we have to really tech too hard for. I think this is going to be a favorable one for us. And if you've been playing the game and been playing Rebecca for a while, you will know what to do in this one. Like I said, bottom deck the Sabos, bottom deck the Aces, KO everything else because you don't really care if they get the other stuff back because they're going to be losing it. And then just kind of wait for the moment to swing out and kill them. Shanks is the last newcomer that is going to be a little bit weird for us to have to deal with. They're kind of migrating into more of this kind of aggressive Shanks build, where their top end is predominantly 8 drops, with some 10 drops in the new 10 drop Shanks that just gives all of our opponent's stuff, all of your opponent's stuff minus 1k and has rush. Card is super good. And then on top of that, they're running now 2 Rogers to help finish stuff. They have some Red Hawks to be able to counter out and potentially KO things. This gets rid of blockers, which is going to be super annoying. They have a lot of stuff that they can play. Like if they wanted to, they could play Lime Juice and turn off our Rebecca blockers or our Bardo blockers. So this deck is going to be a ton more aggressive than it had been, but it is utilizing the minus of the leader ability and the minus of this Shanks and even the Rayleighs to just be able to predominantly keep you from being able to attack back as it's starting to just KO you. So our game plan here is going to be trying to keep the board clear because yes, they do have a decent number of rushers, right? They have a rusher in Roger, they have 4 rushers in Shanks and 4 in Dragon. So you know, if we could keep our board clear, our opponent's board clear, we have a good chance of winning this. The problem is this deck does go super late, which is not great for us because we also go super late. And he has a lot of ways of comboing to KO our 8k characters. Not necessarily our 10-drop character or 10k characters like Kuzan. That's going to be kind of difficult for him to KO without the perfect cards in hand for it, right? Like he'd need Otama into, I think he'd need like double Otama into a Rayleigh to even have a shot of doing that, right? Because that's -2/-2. That would put him down to 6. -3 puts him into range for it to kill him. So like he would need both of these and a Rayleigh to kill a Kuzan, which is going to be hard for him. But if if we are to play this deck properly, it's going to be really rough for us. If they run the other Shanks that just kills 10k, then they have a good matchup into us. Ultimately, I haven't gotten to test this matchup too much because I've been focused too much on 8.5 testing. So this is the one matchup that I've not really tested too much. Plus, the deck has shifted quite a bit from what we originally saw in the meta of OP09. As I said, they're no longer running the just KO something Shanks. They are running the Rush one. They're running Rush Roger. They're running a bit more top-end Rush cards that are really, really powerful, while also some early Rush and some blockers and some reducers and KOers. So we just have to be cautious with how we play this. Play it for the long game and try to survive as much as we can. If we ever go down to 0 life, or Shanks ever goes down to 0 life, Roger just says that we lose. Same thing with him. But that is a dual-edged sword, right? If we somehow can survive the Roger swing, so let's say he plays 10-drop Roger, and one of us is at 0 life, we have to get out of a 13 and everything else without using a blocker, which is crazy hard. But if it's just 2 attacks, that means we need 1k to get out of the Shanks, and we need, what is that? That's 4 2ks to get out of the Roger. It's not impossible. It's not great. Oh, is it 4 2ks? It's 9, right? That's 9. Or that's plus 8. That puts us to 13. So it's 4 2ks and a 1k. So we need a 6-card hand, 2 1ks and 4 2ks. It's not impossible. It's just not likely. So we do have to be playing very cautious about that. Staying at 1 life is really our key. Keeping him from dropping himself down to 0 life but before he can play Roger is going to be our key. He can do that with Sanji, by the way, if you're not aware of that. And if we don't think we can kill him, do not go for reducing him to 0. Leaving him at 0, bad choice, because it gives him Roger, which allows us to just lose, right? Because if Roger comes out and swings, we cannot take the hit. Well, if we have life, we can take the hit. But if this plus this would put us in a point where we can't take the hits, if we're at 0 life and he drops a Roger, we're doomed. If he's at 0 life and he drops a Roger, and he has 2, let's say he has another attacker or 2. Let's say he's kept a Shanks on board as well. Say he has Shanks on board and it sticks because we can't remove it some reason, and we've reduced him down to 0, and then he plays a Roger. We now have to survive 2 attacks plus the Shanks attack without using a blocker. That's devastating. So that's why we have to keep the board clear. That's why we have to play around our life a bit more. You have to be a bit more cognizant of how things go. So, it's going to be using a lot of blockers early. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it's using blockers kind of early, and then late game we need as much counter in our hand to stop stuff like this, and we need to just be board clearing as much as we can. So with that, our important cards for this matchup would probably be Truno, just because it's a spot remover that can get rid of 6s, and if you didn't notice, most of that list outside of his top end cards are 5 and under. So 5 and under, 5 and under, 5 and under. These won't ever get played. These are just 2Ks. But at 6, any of our reducers allow us to KO his stuff. So Trunos would be pretty important in this matchup, whereas Scarlets are important in some of the other ones. Scarlets could be useful in this matchup if we already have some of our other guys on there ready. But other cards that will be important, Hajrunin is going to be an important mid-game card. Sabo is going to be super important because they can't KO when we have Sabo, and we're just going to block and let him die. Because, again, once we get to late game, his value as a blocker is going to be a lot less. Kyros is going to be super important because it's going to be a hard card for them to deal with. Yes, Shanks' ability can turn him off for a turn, but it's perfectly okay if we can bait out his Shanks' ability to reduce this guy by 1k, then we're kind of okay with that. And then Brooks are going to be super important because we don't care if Brook is low. If Brook isn't dead, if Brook is still on board and just doesn't get to swing for anything, okay, cool. We swing Brook and KO your stuff. That's how Brook's going to function for us. We're okay with that. So Brook is also going to be relatively important for that matchup just to give us recurable. So all of our recurring removal is going to be super important, and any of our reducers are going to be super important. Blockers, not so much. We want our counter in our hand as much as we can, and thus Moncherie is going to be super impactful to getting back our Bardos. And then Rebecca's also to get back Bardos, more or less. We do want them to get back removal too, but we generally want these to make sure that we keep 2Ks in our hand because it's going to be so important late game. And that about wraps up the important decks I think that we have to talk about. Other decks that you can talk about, or if you're interested in, there will be Lucci's, there will be Vegapunks, there's going to be Sanjis, there might be a Foxy or two. But like for those ones, I don't think they're going to be as much in the meta. I could be wrong about the Sanji, but we'll just have to wait and see. If the meta starts shaping out differently here, I'll make another video kind of going over what our meta is at that time. These are kind of my preliminary ideas of things that you should know and kind of learn about for Rebecca to utilize into this upcoming meta. I hope you guys liked the video. It was a bit rambly, a bit long, but until next time, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, guys.